Good evening and welcome back. You'll see that Casper has come to join us again, which of course is always very pleasing. He does, I agree, tend to be well behaved. Now then, I'd like to draw your attention to this, which is a new book I've written, Shining Light on Transcendence. It's got to do with a man I met who was able to give light when he meditated, and the whole book is about that and his system. It's interesting. We won't discuss that now until the very end. This, of course, is your course book. Oops. Sorry, Casper. That's our course book, and it's absolutely packed full of examples. Come on, little Casper, didn't mean to frighten you. And I hope you like it, because this is going to be one of the most important times in your life, when finally you can't do anything else but prepare yourself for dying. And one of the things that you're going to learn is that you don't have to be afraid of this. This is terribly important. And so I think probably we'll start now right at the beginning of the dying process. So here's a slide of the dying process. Premonitions, as I say, we did last time. We're going to do deathbed visions this time, enormously important. Then we'll talk about moving to a new reality, and we'll also talk about terminal lucidity, which is important, but more for doctors than for the actual dying themselves. Then you come to death, and you then go on to what happens at the moment of death with deathbed coincidences. And surrounding the dying, you have clocks which stop, animals which howl, animals at a distance, bells which ring, light in the room, and shapes seen leaving the body. We do now need to change this diagram, get rid of that old picture of death, and here's a new one which I'd like you to see. You'll see that it's a very friendly figure of death, and it's a much better one, because this is in fact what the death process is. It's designed not to be scary for you, or that's what the data shows. Okay, you get the diagnosis, you're going to die. You're sad, you're frightened, and some of you may not even be prepared, but those of you who have been to these talks will at least be prepared. And one of the things then that you'll wonder is dying inevitable or not? And you're going to come to a time when dying is inevitable. So we're going to go through the dying process. I want you to look at this slide, and you will see that the first thing was premonitions, which we did last week, and the main thing this time is deathbed visitors. Now, some people will tell you that deathbed visitors are just in the imagination of the dying. They're not, because they are occasionally seen by children in the room where the person is dying, and sometimes by hospice staff, although that's not common. And the visions are very clear, and they occur in clear consciousness. There is no question that they are delusional, they're not confusional, they occur in clear consciousness. But the other important thing is they have a meaning for the person, and the meaning is a very, very important one. So let us understand then, what are we doing? About a fortnight before we die, it's likely that there will be the deathbed visitors. Now, what are they like, and what is their function? Why on earth do we have deathbed visitors? And if they come, what do they tell us? Well, it's very important that you understand this. They tell us that they are going to be there and look after you during the dying process. It's enormously supportive and helpful. Has anybody been really scared of their deathbed visitors? If they have, nobody's told us about it. So you can take it that if it does happen, it's very, very rare. Now, they occur, as I said, about a fortnight before we die. And sometimes the deathbed visitors will be outside the hospice or the hospital, mainly the hospice. Then they will come into the corridors, and finally they'll come into the room where you are. Now, when they come in, who will they be? Well, I'll show you some figures for that, because we've analysed deathbed visions, and so we actually know who they're likely to be. And they will talk to you. And after they've talked to you, they will come and sit on the bed. Why will they sit on the bed? Well, those of you who have children will know perfectly well what you do when you have an ill child. You go and sit on its bed. It's enormously comforting. And so a lot of the deathbed visitors will sit on the bed. They will speak to you. They will probably be your mother or your father. Parents are a quarter of the visitors in our series. And they will chat to you about sort of everyday things, but they are indicating to you that they're going to be there with you during the dying process, so you're not to be afraid of it. And they may even take you into a different area, which is very much like the near-death area. It's full of light and love and compassion and help and support. And you will go into that and come back, but more of that next time. I want to talk a little bit more about the actual visitors themselves. They tend to be in their prime. In other words, if your mum or dad was very old or demented when they died, they don't come back like that. They come back in their prime. Also, if they've lost a limb, their limbs will have regrown, and so they appear young-ish, fit and healthy. Now, when you're talking to them, they will sometimes say, we're going to come back on Tuesday for you to take you further into the dying process and accompany you. Well, that's okay. But let's assume that you know you have a son or daughter who's coming from, let's say, America, and they're not going to be here until Wednesday or Thursday. Now, you can negotiate a little with the deathbed visitors. If you say to them, I don't want to come now because there's a hospice party which I have to attend, they're not going to be persuaded by that at all. But something very important and very emotional to you, they will listen to, and so they will delay their return. I met a wonderful hospice nurse from Canada, and she told me about what happens in her hospice. She said, nobody in my hospice dies alone. Now that's very surprising, because she was in one of the least populated parts of Canada, and so the chances that everybody all the relatives could always get to the side of the dying was very unlikely. So I asked her, well, how does that happen? And she said, we use deathbed visitors. I say to the person, remember it's always in the last fortnight, so a lot of time, I say to the person, tell me, who do you think is going to come and collect you? Now that's a question you might like to ask yourselves. Who will collect you when you die? Or she asks the person in the hospice this, and they will say somebody who's been very meaningful to them in their life, quite often a mother, but maybe a close relative. And they say, she says, "What's the name?" And they say, let's say, Mary. So she then says to them, "Well, look, when Mary comes, let me know." So that's an interesting statement, because it doesn't mean that she's going to go with Mary immediately. It means that Mary is going to familiarize herself with the person who's dying. Then each morning the nurse comes in and says, "Hello, has Mary been yet?" One morning she will say, "Yes, she came yesterday." And so the nurse says, "Well, look, when Mary comes, go with her." And that's what happens. And that means then that they never die alone, because they have in fact linked up with the deathbed visitor. Now, some people will say they're not real, but that's because they haven't seen the way that the dying respond to the deathbed visitors. They're very real, I can assure you of that. Some people say, how can this be? Is this spirits of the future or something like that? No, don't go into this. Just take it very simply for what it is, because this is what's going to be important for you when you die. And as we're all going to die, we're all going to have to learn about this process. Next, is it only family relations? No, a lot of spiritual people are there. What are they like? They're people who look as if they are very spiritual, and they are about, I think, 17%. I'll give you these figures in a moment. And they all say they're very comforting, they're very helpful, and they're very important to the people who are dying. Now, will these deathbed visitors come if you don't believe in the fact that they're there? Please note this, because it's absolutely fundamental. The dying process is a set process, and it seems to occur independently of belief structures. So it doesn't matter what you believe, whether you're a Buddhist or a Christian or a Mohammedan. It actually makes little difference. And we've got some lovely accounts of people who didn't believe that anything occurred after death. And we then experience their surprise when their deathbed visitors come and point out that in fact there is a continuing process of some sort. So they're important. So one, you can negotiate with them. Two, they will take you and look after you. But we've talked about parents and we've talked about spiritual people. Do friends ever come? Yes. We had somebody who was in the battle of the Somme, and when he died later, a lot of his friends who were killed in the Somme came to his bedside to welcome him as he was dying and crossing over. So yes, friends do come. Now tell me, do you think angels come? Do we get angels? Well, we get about 3% of angels in the UK, and a lot of people are rather disappointed that angels don't come. Well, don't be disappointed, because if you want an angel, I'd recommend you go to the Bible Belt of North America, where a friend of mine, John Lerma, runs a hospice, and he told me that angels were in fact very common in people who are dying. So it depends where you are. I think actually what we're really talking about is the culture and belief structure that you die in. But certainly in the UK and in Holland, because we've got data from both, angels are very rare. So what else can we say? What about dogs or cats? Do they ever come? Because after all, sometimes either a dog or a cat has been somebody who's very close, some animal that's been very close to you and very meaningful. Will they come when you die? In all the accounts we've had loads of accounts, but about 1,500. I'm very much afraid there is only one dog that was seen. In fact, it wasn't one dog. He described it as I was dying, I saw all the dogs of my life come rushing down the hill towards me. It was a rather nice picture, but it's very, very rare. So the deathbed visitors are enormously important. Just to stress again, they're usually family members, not always. The spiritual beings. Sometimes the people can't see them or talk, and then they hold out their hands like that to the visitor. So they can be spiritual beings, they can be people who are very, very, I suppose you have to say, important in a spiritual way to them. And although we don't know, but they certainly help them. So this is one of the most important parts of the dying process, when the dead relatives come and they're there. If people say they don't think they're real, that's not what the dying say. People say they're confusional. That's not what the dying say. That's not what the dying see. If they think that they are imagination, that's not what the dying see and say. So we take them for what the dying say they are. They're there to help them cross over into this new area, show them what it's like, and then bring them back again. So that's their first function, to reassure them. The second function is to give a lot of help and support and tell the dying when they're going to die, because the relatives say we'll be back, let's say on Thursday, and they will come back on Thursday and will take you to commence the rest of your dying process. But if you say you don't want to go on Thursday because somebody's coming, then as I've said, they will probably listen to that and come on Friday or Saturday. So you can negotiate a little with them, and it's very important to know that. So if you see a deathbed visitor, don't be afraid. They're not frightening. You won't be afraid, and you will be comforted. And if they want to take you and show you this domain that you'll be going into, then go with them very happily, because it is an interesting domain. So then, this is one of the most important parts of the dying process. It's all there to help and support you go through the next bit, which we'll come to next time. Don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. As I said, none of our accounts have frightened anybody. Some people, if they're unfamiliar with it, may feel it's a little strange, but it's not. It's part of the process. So now I'm going to show you a slide of the frequency of the deathbed visitors, and then we'll end. So here's the slide. So here is the slide of 118 visions from 102 people. Parents were 24%, persons unknown, spiritual people were 17%. Greetings, joyfully, just holding out your hands, as I'll describe, 14%. Other relatives, about 14%. Your wife or husband, about 14%. Brothers and sisters, only about 9%. Grandparents, 3%. And there's your angels, only 3%. Sorry about that. But there are 3% of friends for you. Thank you very much for watching this evening, And if you've got any questions, please do let me know. Now, I have got an Instagram account, and it is Peter_Fenwick_PF. So it's Peter_Fenwick_PF. That's an Instagram account, and you may prefer to leave experiences and so on that account, but of course they will be public. If you really want to make sure that only I get them, you can send them to my email account, but try and use the Instagram account if you can. My ordinary email address is peter_fenwick@compuserve.com. CompuServe is COMPUSERVE. Well, nice talking to you this evening, and we're really getting down to work with the dying process, and don't be afraid. Thank you.